We couldn't believe what we really saw.
What if someone or something could warn you about the future?
Half man, half monster, I guess you'd call it.
Never seen anything like it. I hope I never do again, you know. It was just unbelievable.
But the very sight of this messenger filled you with terror.
Those eyes. That's all she'd ever say was those eyes.
What if it showed you a disaster was about to occur, but no one would believe you?
People were screaming. You could hear them hollering for help.
It's already happened, not just here, but all over the world. And it's happening right now. Wherever this messenger appears, tragedy follows. What went on in Point Pleasant? What did they witness? Where will it go next?
What if? And if's a big question.
It's a story most of us have never heard. Now they're making a movie about it, called The Mothman Prophecies. But this is no Hollywood fantasy. The events and the people are real. You're about to hear eyewitness accounts from the past and profound lessons for the future. This is a search for meaning hidden on the edges of accepted reality. This is the search for the Mothman. Throughout history, stories have circulated of enormous flying creatures, dark-winged beings that prophesize death and destruction, but generate such fear that eyewitnesses can't face or understand their meaning. Author Lauren Coleman has been researching these creatures for over 30 years.
Mothman really fits right in with the long history that we have of seeing winged creatures, flying humanoids, big birds. They've had many different monstrous names down through history, and they really start from the times of the ancient Babylonians up until, a month ago.
Writer John Keel was in Point Pleasant, West Virginia when the events there took place. His book, The Mothman Prophecies, is the definitive account of those sightings.
These things have always been here. The Indians in America here called it the Thunderbird, a huge bird. In the Orient, they called it the Garuda.
You can go all the way back to 1880 when a strange flying man was seen over Coney Island, New York. The Houston Batman of the 1950s. Rio Grande, 1976 is one case. Right now, you've got a wave of Thunderbird sightings in Pennsylvania. And so Mothman, if you look at it in context, is not that unusual, but what makes Mothman so interesting and really exciting is that you have over 100 witnesses saying they saw it in one concentrated area in 13-month periods.
It started with an incredible story that John Keel ran across in a small-town newspaper.
I was driving around the south where they had a lot of UFO sightings, and Mothman thing broke. It came over the wires. 4 young couples had seen something in Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
It was November 15th, 1966. Late in the evening, 2 young couples drove to a remote hangout on the outskirts of town.
2 couples joyriding around the TNT area, which is a munitions dump from World War II. But all of a sudden, they see these giant red eyes. Very apparent that they aren't supposed to be there. And all of a sudden, they see a form to it. The form takes shape. They see there's huge wings to this form.
We couldn't believe what we really saw. And this thing was standing there, but it had a body just like a man. You could see the muscles in its legs. We sit there for a minute and looked at each other, and then we took off.
And they get scared, and they want to get out of there. And all of a sudden, they're taking off. They're going anywhere from 100, 120 miles an hour. And they notice that this creature is following them. And they can see it through the back window. A shadow, is going across the car once in a while. And they can't get away from it.
We didn't really talk about it or anything, but we saw it all the way down the road into town. It followed us.
They couldn't get away from it until they, almost got to the edge of Point Pleasant.
The creature vanished as they entered town, and the couples headed straight for the sheriff's office. He went out that night to investigate their story, but found no sign of the creature. When Linda finally got home, family friend Doris DeWeese was there to meet her.
When they got home, she got in the house, she collapsed. Of course, they had to call a doctor and have him come out, give her something. I mean, she was hysterical. That's all there was to it.
The following day, the sheriff held a press conference at the county courthouse to discuss the sightings. The local press jumped on the story and dubbed the mysterious flying creature the Mothman, after a character from the Batman television show. Doris remembers vividly how Linda described it.
The head looked like a man, and it had fiery red eyes, half man, half monster, I guess you'd call it.
Something unnatural was stalking the hills of West Virginia, and John Keel decided to go and see it for himself. But this was only the beginning. Others would encounter it, and tragedy would soon follow in its wake.
All I could see were these two red eyes. I kept looking at it. I couldn't stop. And then I guess it just took off.
When writer John Keel arrived in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, he could tell something had the community on edge.
Yeah, you could feel that something was happening there. And so I lingered there, and I started getting into all of this stuff. I found many strange things going on in the homes, and I found that many people had seen things but never reported it to anybody.
Past few months, people have been coming up to me and reporting that they've been seeing strange things. And I'm not talking about the town speed freak. I'm talking about good, honest, church-going people. Now, I've known these folks my entire life, and they seem downright embarrassed to be bringing it up.
Bringing what up?
It's hard to explain.
The capital of Mason County, Point Pleasant is a tight-knit community of 5,000, where everyone knows their neighbors, where life moves at the simple and welcoming pace found in the rural South.
Everybody thinks of hillbillies when they think of West Virginia. They were not hillbillies, and they were not the kind of people that would make these things up.
Since the 18th century, farmers have made a good living from this fertile land along the banks of the Ohio and Kanawha rivers. Researcher Dan Drazen visited Point Pleasant in 1966 to investigate the strange sightings.
People seem like ordinary people, very friendly, matter-of-fact folks. What you see is what you get. I felt very welcome in the town.
Just north of town is a densely overgrown wildlife preserve, much of it almost inaccessible. But hidden beneath the thick brush is evidence of a grim history. Part of the area had been used during World War II as a place to covertly manufacture and store munitions. Remnants of a factory still stand, along with almost 100 large concrete domes that were built into the ground to house the high explosives. Because of its past, locals dubbed it the TNT area. That's where Marcella Bennett was headed on the night of November 16, 1966. She and her brother were bringing her 3-year-old daughter to visit relatives who lived on the outskirts of the TNT area. As they pulled up near the house, they spotted some strange lights in the sky that hovered above the trees. Marcella's brother was mesmerized.
I told him I didn't want to see any lights, and he says, no, stop. He said, you got to look at this. This isn't a plane. And I said, oh, sure, you know. And I just kept on walking towards the car.
She was carrying her daughter when suddenly a figure stirred nearby.
I had just approached the car, and out of the corner of my eyes, I saw this creature, which was over 6 foot tall with feathers. It just looked like a giant bird, but yet a man. And it was standing with its shoulders and then its neck down in like this. I just couldn't imagine what I was seeing and panicked, and when I tried to run, I couldn't run.
In a state of shock, Marcella fell to the ground directly on top of her little girl.
I couldn't get up to get off of her, and I thought, well, you know, she's dead. You know, I'm killing her, but I couldn't move. You know, it was just, I was in a trance.
Finally pulling herself together, she picked up her child and ran towards the house.
When I finally did get up to my feet and get my feet working, I realized that my knees were all torn up and my hands and my face had been buried in the sand. I couldn't see. and I thought I heard the creature fly off with these real loud flopping wings, you know, made a real loud sound.
The family locked themselves inside the house, but hysteria gripped them as the creature reappeared, shuffling onto the porch and peering into the windows. The police were summoned, but it had vanished by the time they arrived.
It was just very frightening. One of the worst frightening experience I've ever had, you know, in my life. And hope it's the last. It still bothers me to even talk about the creature, you know.
Marcella relived the incident for months and was so distraught that she sought medical attention to deal with her anxieties. To this day, she is tormented by frightening dreams and visions.
I could be driving along and all of a sudden I'd feel like there was something in the back seat and I would just hit my brake, you know. I'd just slam on the brake and just turn real fast and look at my back seat. The presence of him was still around, you know. And that was an eerie feeling. For those folks in West Virginia, it's a trauma. It's a trauma as big as anything they'd ever experienced, and they're going to be frightened for their whole life.
John Keel's stay in Point Pleasant turned from days to weeks as more and more eyewitnesses came forward.
Most of them were just bewildered. There were a few who were very afraid to go out of their house at night. It did cast a shadow over the whole valley.
Well, what did you see?
I was looking at it in the sky, and then all of a sudden it just, you know, just sort of sank right into the trees, you know, and it kind of moved around a little, and it looked like, you know, it's trying to get away.
And I just kind of froze. It was terrifying. That's the last we've seen of him. That was enough.
There's very little humor in these stories. These are people who were genuinely terrified or genuinely puzzled.
John Keel became convinced that something very serious and very real was going on. But no one knew what it was, why it was there, or what it meant. More sightings would be reported, and not just of the creature. The situation was about to become even more terrifying.
Mr. Klein. Hey. I got to talk to you. Last night, I woke up with the worst headache I've ever had in my life, and I went into the bathroom to get some aspirin, and I happened to look in the mirror, and I swear to God, I see something I can't describe, but it sure as hell is not my reflection.
Through the winter of 1966, sightings of the creature known as the Mothman continued to be reported around Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Not only were eyewitnesses terrified and emotionally disturbed by their encounters, but some were even physically affected, exhibiting strange burns on their skin and inflamed, swollen eyes.
I woke up and nearly both my eyes were swelled up.
What did the doctor say?
He couldn't explain it.
See this one here? It ain't never healed.
Her eyes, the first thing I seen was swollen and red, and water was coming out of them.
Keith Aker was 17-year-old Connie Carpenter's boyfriend at the time and soon-to-be husband. Connie herself is still even today too frightened to come forward and tell her story, so Keith agreed to set the record straight.
I'd like people just to understand that I'm here to make sure that they don't think that she's a kook, because she's not. And what she has said she's seen, she has actually seen.
Still in high school, Connie was driving home when she saw something unusual on the side of the road.
I don't know what caught her attention, whether it was a shadow or what, but she said she looked and slowed down, and here it was. Wings come out and it went straight up. And she said it hit it right for me. She said all I could see was the red eyes. I went to the house that night, and her mom met me at the door.